You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I survived a hurricane. We're here with John Macon Gillespie to talk about the LSU game. And did Diego Pounds play better last week against South Carolina than any of us realized? John's going to go over the injury report as well. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast as well. I do want to let you know that this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we're going to go to John Macon Gillespie, the publisher of Ole Miss on SI. How you doing, John?
Pretty good, Steven. Glad to hear that y'all are doing okay after the weather that went through this past week. I know it was kind of hectic there for a while, but I'm glad y'all came out the other side of it.
It was interesting. Now, Hurricane Ian for me was a much more damaging event, but this one didn't do too much, but we didn't have power and we didn't have cell service for 2 days. And it was like we were living in the Stone Age. When I couldn't grab my phone and search Twitter or check and see how my videos that were scheduled were doing. That was so anxiety inducing, but it was so relaxing because I could just sit on the back porch and had nothing to worry about because there's nothing I could do.
Yeah, it's kind of a good and bad scenario there, right? Obviously you want to be able to keep up with how things are going in the outside world, but at the same time too, because I've been in that situation before too, not with a hurricane, but it's just like, okay, well, there's really nothing I can do, so I'm just going to sit here and hang out, So there's some good and bad to it for sure once you kind of get on the other side of the storm itself.
I'm going to tell you, this hurricane probably was worse for me than Ian was because of the internet outage, because Verizon went down and it never went down during Ian. And when Verizon went down, and that completely disconnected everything of going on, and that Verizon outage is like suppressed numbers and all that. And I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that Thursday's show was not going to be doing as well as later on. But I do want to say thank you to everybody for the well wishes and the prayers and all of that. We made it almost no damage. The pile for me cleaning up the debris in my yard was actually less than the pile that we have when we trim our trees. So yeah. We came out pretty good, but thank you very much for that. So let's talk first of all, before we get into the LSU game and the injury reports. I do want to say it's interesting because watching the Alabama-South Carolina game, and first of all, South Carolina should probably fire their offensive coordinator right now. He did nothing to help Sellers, and with a competent offensive coordinator, South Carolina probably wins that game. And Alabama's not particularly good, but the thing I want to talk about, the point in that game, is that the Ole Miss offensive line giving up 1 sack against that defensive line and none by Diego Pounds against Kyle Kennard is more of a big deal than I think we're doing. And I think Diego Pounds needs more credit for what happened in that ball game.
Well, we especially can tell that now after this week, right? Because of what South Carolina was able to do against Alabama. I think you're right that we maybe were not talking enough about what he was able to do for Ole Miss a week ago up front. Because, really, you could tell that South Carolina's edges were affecting the game just a little bit, but obviously that he was not able to get to Jackson Dart. So obviously keeping him upright was huge, and Ole Miss being able to kind of dominate and win that game. Diego being able to do what he was able to do against some really good edge pieces there for the Gamecocks was pretty phenomenal. We haven't really talked about that.
Yeah, and Kyle Kennard, legit defensive end, and what South Carolina does in their defense, they cause turnovers against Alabama. Like I said, if they would have done a little bit more to protect Lenora Sellers, by the end of the game, the safeties for Alabama was playing about 8 yards off the ball because they knew that they weren't going to throw downfield, and they were just reacting to all of that quick stuff because the only way they knew how to throw the ball was a drop back pass, roll the guy out, do what you have to do, run some screens to slow down this rush, because all Alabama did at the end of the game, South Carolina needed 15 yards to win the game, just 15 yards. and you ended up an offensive lineman catching a tip pass when there's no timeouts that wasted 30 seconds, and then drop back pass, and then heave it up Hail Mary style. And that was just baffling to me. It honestly, what was going on. But I digress about that. I just wanted to say on this show that give credit for what's going on to Diego Pounds and the Ole Miss offensive line, because apparently that South Carolina game now it looks a little bit differently, because this is the second SEC team that defensive line is wrecked, because Kentucky they wrecked, and the first half and the last 2 minutes of the Alabama half was absolutely ridiculously wrecked.
Yeah, and that was big for Ole Miss to be able to, play well against that last week, and I think that that's only going to help them moving forward with having that experience against front sevens like Kentucky and South Carolina. I think that's really going to be beneficial as the season moves on, including tonight. I mean, I kind of think that too. So, yeah, I mean, it was really big for Ole Miss to be able to kind of protect Jackson Dart during the situations, even when the offense was slowed down a little bit. When Trey Harris went out, Dart was still for the most part pretty well protected. So, yeah, it's really big.
All right, so let's turn our attention towards tonight. It's real interesting. The injury report was very nice to Ole Miss when it came out, and I was playing a little bit of catch up. Congratulations and thank you to Lane Kiffin for the traditional uniforms at LSU. Thank you very much for that. I'm assuming the traditional uniforms in navy blue is going to be the Egg Bowl. Thank you for that ahead of time as well. But the injury report came out and was about as good as can be expected for Ole Miss.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, Matt Jones, probably not going to be able to go today, but Trey Harris listed as probable. That's obviously a very good sign for Ole Miss.
And he
Still some
posted a story on his Instagram story that was very cryptic that sounded like he was getting ready to play.
Yeah. Still a few pieces there listed as questionable on the list that came out on Friday, but I mean, for the most part, in my opinion, Trey Harris was kind of the biggest wild card coming into this week a little bit, based on hey, is he going to be able to go, and what does that mean for the Ole Miss offense if he's not able to? But now it looks like he is going to be able to go, so that's obviously huge for Ole Miss on the road, because Dart and Harris have such an important chemistry in the passing game that having that connection in a road environment, I think, is very, very important. And him being able to suit up and go is going to be huge.
The one trap that I think that Jackson Dart needs to avoid tonight, and that is him being the roommate on the road with Trey Harris. He knows how much this means to him. Over-reliance on Trey Harris would be problematic.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think that that would be an issue, but I don't necessarily see that he will be over reliant on him, although that has potentially kind of been the case at some point this year. But I think that it opens up so much for the Ole Miss offense when he is able to be in the game, and that's just that I don't think that can be overstated. So. Yeah, I think it's going to be really, really big that he's able to play tonight, and we'll see if Dart can kind of move the ball around to some other guys as well.
All right, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Whenever we come back, we are going to talk more about this Ole Miss LSU game. We're going to look at some maybe Ulysses Bentley type stuff and continue to go down this injury report and what's going on there, because there's a chance Princely and Mommy Ellen is going to suit up. But until then, stick around. Hey everyone, I've got something for you that is a real game changer. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic designed to help you feel great in the morning after a night out. It's been created by PhD scientists. ZBiotics tackles those rough mornings by breaking down a toxic byproduct in your gut that's responsible for your hangovers, not dehydration like most people think. Look, I won't lie. I was a bit skeptical at first, but then while hanging out with some friends at a weekend barbecue, I decided to give it a go. I made ZBiotics my first drink of the night, followed by my usual favorite drink, and it was amazing. It felt like I hadn't even gone out the night before. No sluggishness, no grogginess, just ready to take on the day. Here is how it works. ZBiotics produces an enzyme that breaks down the toxic byproduct in your gut that's responsible for those rough mornings. Just remember, for best results, make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. And of course, drink responsibly. Head on over to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, at checkout. Plus, ZBiotics is backed by a 100% money back guarantee. If you're not satisfied, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, that's zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $15 off. Try ZBiotics. It's the key to feeling your best after a night out. Hey, NFL fans, you can start your season off with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Ole Miss is favored currently by 3.5 points against the Tigers in a line that has gone up over the week a little bit, even though the money's kind of coming in on the Tigers right now. I mean, maybe Vegas knows something. When you get a hunch like that in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, John. In this game, we also got a thing that Princely Amon Mielen moved up to, I don't know, game time decision, I think is how they phrase that. And Princely Amon Mielen in this game against fairly good defensive tackles or offensive tackles, that would be a pretty big get, especially with Santaria Perkins waiting in the wings.
Yeah, I think so. And Santarin did a really, really good job last week for
SEC
Ole
Player of the
Miss.
Week.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he did a very good job for Ole Miss last week against South Carolina. And but yeah, I mean, having Princely Amon Mielen on the field as well, I mean, that you can never really say no to that if you're Ole Miss. That's his presence in this game would be really big because, kind of like you said, LSU does have some pretty good tackle play, and Ole Miss being able to attack that with some of its best guys. I mean, that's going to be really big on the road because LSU's offense, I mean, has some firepower, right? And being able to get back to Garrett Nussmeier, in my opinion, will be one of the keys to this game.
Yeah, it should be interesting because the tackles for LSU, they're very good. Both of them are very good, but interior is where the pressure needs to be. So it's kind of a Walter Nolan and JJ Pegues type game and a Chris Pupal in the middle of that offense. If you can handle that, that's going to be all right because you're not dealing with Jaden Daniels. You're not dealing with that gazelle running back there. The Ole Miss can play two-man from time to time in this game and is going to be better off in a defense that you couldn't run against Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was really a big wild card for the defense last year is trying to just contain Jaden Daniels. Now that, and I have nothing against Garrett Nussmeier because he's obviously very good in his own right, and the defense kind of believes so too. But he does not have the same explosive capability that Jaden Daniels had. So being able to kind of structure your defensive scheme in a slightly different way because of that is going to be important for Ole Miss, and I think that's something that plays into Ole Miss's hand a little bit this week. Obviously, when you are not playing Jaden Daniels, who's now doing really well in the NFL, that's a good thing for opposing defenses.
Yeah, and LSU might be without their number 3 and number 4 wide receivers in this game as well, which that helps them out as well. Kyron Lacey and Armstrong, they're both very good, and Mason Taylor is very good. Those are probably the top 3 options at receiver for LSU. But whenever the drop off after that, there's a lot of unknown that Ole Miss might face.
Yeah, I agree, and this is going to be a big secondary game for the Rebels as well. I think because last week, I mean, they looked a lot better, especially from a penalty perspective, than they had previously, and not kind of reverting back to some of those old habits is going to be key today as well because you don't want to extend drives for LSU, especially if they are missing a couple of key pieces there at wide receiver. You don't want to continue to give them opportunities and first downs and things like that with defensive holdings or pass interference calls, things like that. So if Ole Miss can kind of replicate what it was able to do last week against South Carolina, that's obviously the mindset that they need to have going into Baton Rouge today.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. And this is the 100th year of Tiger Stadium anniversary. They've painted off up the end zones a certain way. They have their traditional uniforms. They're not wearing throwback helmets like they did in 2018. So this is the first time since 2014 that Ole Miss has come out there and LSU has come out with that uniform that just I think is absolute college football perfection. This is a must win for both programs. Whoever loses this game, for all intents and purposes, they are out of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think I mean, mathematically, technically, I guess they're not, but I think that
Yeah,
your
with
back is
Georgia
really,
and all.
really
Yeah,
right. I mean, your back's really up against the wall to essentially win out to kind of get in and feel halfway okay about it. For Ole Miss, I mean, winning tonight would be huge because you go into a bye week next week where you have a chance to get healthy and then return home to play Oklahoma. And if you win tonight, you've emerged out of what, in my opinion, is one of the, if not the most important stretches of the schedule pretty well. And that's, how you bounced back after losing to Kentucky. If Ole Miss is able to win tonight and have put together back-to-back road wins, that's going to tell me a lot about this team and how they were able to respond to that loss a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, it would be huge because you have a chance to kind of get healthy a little bit in that bye week next week and get ready for the Sooners for sure.
yeah, and that's the real true game for everybody that knows. And we have no idea exactly what the uniform is going to look like, but we do have a good idea what the helmet's going to look like, and it looks honestly really good. Ulysses Bentley looks like he is going to be getting those second team reps that everybody has been clamoring for the better part of the first half of the season. Wouldn't it be a very Lane Kiffin thing to rely on Rashad Amos?
It would. It really would. And I hope for the fan base's sake that it is Bentley tonight because I mean that has been a huge talking point for fans pretty much all year, wondering where he is, what the deal is, why is he not in the game? Because it's my opinion that he is one of the two best backs on the roster. I do believe that, and that's nothing against Matt Jones. I just think that Ulysses Bentley brings something to the table that can be very, very good for this offense, and he's just not being utilized. So, hopefully for everyone's mental health and sanity tonight, it is Ulysses Bentley. But we'll have to see. It would be a lot like Lane Kiffin to run Rashad Amos out there and let him have the
Or
second team
Dominic
reps.
Thomas. Everybody's like, what?
Yeah, like it's like okay, and that's why I'm not saying even necessarily that it's a guarantee that Bentley gets all those reps because it could be they
Yeah.
could go a different direction with something.
Yeah. It's a very Lane thing to go a different direction. It just is.
Yeah, but
There's no,
I do hope for the fan base's collective sanity that it is Bentley tonight and that he kind of gets some action because I think it's kind of been lacking in this offense for sure for the first 6 weeks.
I think we're going to talk about this in just a second, but I think that the defensive secondary, this is a Trey Washington game. You've got the interior, the defensive line, but also the free safety. I think either him or maybe even Lewis Moore, who's listed at probable for the first time in a couple of weeks. That's a big get back in the secondary as well. Him and Yam Banks as well. I think one of those three safeties, they're going to pick him off once or twice, pick off Nussmeier once or twice whenever they have to start stretching the field. Listen, this game is going to be an absolute cauldron, and LSU is very fired up for the Ole Miss game. The Ole Miss LSU rivalry is very special when Ole Miss is good. When LSU knows that they need to be afraid of Ole Miss, this rivalry gets ramped up to the levels that we expected. There are certain years that it's just not quite there on the Ole Miss side because they're not quite good enough. But over the last couple of years, Ole Miss has gotten pretty good. And when you look at LSU having any hope to make the playoff, they need to beat Ole Miss. Ole Miss needing to make the playoff, they need to beat LSU. The crowd's going to be absolutely nuts because LSU is a home underdog at night in Tiger Stadium. That's absolutely nuts. There's a lot of stuff that, it's going to be interesting to see because a whole lot is playing in Ole Miss's favor right now.
Yeah, and Ole Miss handled what was at kickoff a pretty hostile road environment last week and was able to emerge out of that with a pretty convincing win. I mean, 27-3, you can't really scoff at that in the road on the road in the
It
SEC.
should have been 50-3. If you just
Yeah,
look at it, it was an absolute beatdown.
yeah. And now, so you passed that one test as far as being on the road in the SEC, but now you have another one, and it's night in Tiger Stadium. I do think the crowd is obviously a variable that Ole Miss has to account for tonight. I think it would be stupid to not do that. That's going to be something to watch. But if they're able to pass this test, that tells me a little bit about, okay, this team has some dog in them to where they don't think a moment is too big necessarily if they're able to surpass this test and go into the bye week 6-1. Because I mean tonight, I mean this is the biggest test they've faced from a, hey, you've really got to win this one, outside of last week, of course, but this one has a little bit extra oomph behind it because it's LSU and it's in Baton Rouge. So if they're able to pass this test, man, I mean it tells me a lot about this team and their mindset here at the midway point of the season.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. When we come back, we will talk about this being the most important game in the Ole Miss era in the last 5 or 6, heck, the last 60 years at Ole Miss. And we'll talk about how this is also the most important game potentially of Lane Kiffin's head coaching career. So stick around for that. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn a very liberal 4.5 APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of the high net worth for the any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for just $5 per month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Remember, investing involves risk. Rates may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. We're back with John Macon Gillespie from Ole Miss on SI. Listen, John, I think this is the biggest game that Ole Miss football has played since probably 2003. Now, if it gets to that Georgia game and Ole Miss still just has one loss, that'll be potentially the biggest game in a very long time. But this might be the biggest coaching game in Lane Kiffin's head coaching career. Now, assistant coaches, he was an assistant on those USC teams and Alabama teams. Obviously is not there, but as a head coach, this is probably the biggest game that he has ever coached, or at least the most consequential.
Yeah, I think I can kind of get behind that because one, I mean, you've got the rivalry aspect of this game. I mean, that is what it is. Two, it's on the road in Death Valley at night, which that's made a big deal out of for sure. And three, I mean, you as far as consequences go, I mean, you've got to try to win this game to feel pretty good about your college football playoff hopes going into the bye week. It's you can't really overstate how big this is for Ole Miss tonight, for program momentum, getting into the playoff and fan base mood, things like that. It's huge for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels tonight, and you can't really overlook that.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. As you can imagine in the chat, I'm looking through there. Just about all the questions so far are about, are we going to see Ulysses Bentley? And I think we are. We all assume we will, but I will not put 100% on Lane Kiffin to do any of that.
No, I think it would make a whole lot of sense for Ole Miss to play Ulysses Bentley tonight with Matt Jones out, but you can never really guarantee anything like that where Lane Kiffin or other coaches even are involved in these decisions. So, yeah, I think it would make a lot of sense for Bentley to play. That doesn't mean that he will.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting indeed. Now, the earlier games like Mississippi State and Georgia, they're tied 3-3 right now. It's one of those stop the count type deals, like almost at the end of the first quarter. Mike Bobo is not having a particularly good game. State's playing inspired, but offensively, they're so limited with a true freshman quarterback. They're having the same problem that Oklahoma's having at the moment with a true freshman quarterback against Texas. If they had an upperclassman, I think if Jackson Arnold was playing quarterback for Oklahoma is probably leading this game. But since they're going with a true freshman, you're so limited. You have to cut down the playbook so much.
Right. Yeah. And I haven't seen much of that game yet this afternoon, but it really does. I mean, it impacts you when you have a young guy taking snaps like that because there is, even if he's uber talented, I mean, there's less that you can do because the playbook gets limited. His knowledge of the offense is not as expansive as somebody who's experienced would be. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely impacts how things run whenever you have a true freshman back there under center. But that is interesting, the state Georgia score
It's
right now.
10-3. It's 10-3 now. Yeah.
Okay,
Georgia just
well,
scored a touchdown.
okay, well, thank you for that. But still, I mean, hey, it was 3-3 for a little while. I mean,
Yeah.
hang
They
the
were
banner, I
playing
guess.
inspired. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was definitely a stop the count type moment.
Yeah.
So real quick, how do you expect tonight's game to go before we get out of here?
I've got Ole Miss. I think my prediction was winning 31-24 is the one I went on the record with.
That's what I picked too.
Yeah, I think Ole Miss wins by about a touchdown, but um, look, I'm not going to say I'm not going to go into this thing and say, hey, I'm 100% confident Ole Miss is going to win this game because I'm not. I don't feel super strongly that hey, Ole Miss is going to run away with this game or anything like that either. I think LSU is going to put up a fight tonight. I think both teams are coming in really, really inspired, kind of like you said earlier, really motivated because they know what's at stake here, and it's a rivalry game. If Ole Miss can handle the road environment, though, and not get caught up in anything weird happening, I do think Ole Miss has the better team, and I think that's going to win out in the end, and that's why I have Ole Miss winning and covering the spread by a few points.
Yeah, traditionally over the last few years, when Lane Kiffin's taken his crew on the road, they've been pretty poised, and you're going to need poise in this one because, like I said, this is going to be the last time it was like this for Ole Miss and Tiger Stadium was 2014, and we all know what happened. Ole Miss freaked out. Bo Wallace just threw the ball up into the end zone and ended up getting picked off at the end of the game. So freakouts happen. So we'll see exactly how it goes. So what's going on at Ole Miss on SI for this game?
Obviously going to have a lot of in-game coverage going on. This thing will probably go until 10 or 10:30 tonight, if I had to guess. So we're going to have a lot of in-game stuff going on, some live updates, that kind of thing. Then we'll have plenty of post-game coverage rolling out late into tonight and into tomorrow as well. It's kind of business as usual from a coverage standpoint, how we kind of hit things on Saturdays, but it should be a lot of fun, and if anything breaks during the game, I mean, we'll have that up as well on the site.
All right, John Macon Gillespie, publisher of Ole Miss on SI. Ole Miss takes on LSU at 6:30 Central on ABC. I think Sean McDonough and McElroy are on the call. The last time they called that was the Kentucky game, so take that for what you will. And you can catch it on Sirius XM channel 190. Ole Miss is a 3.5-point favorite. I think the over-under right now is at like 53 points or something like that. So we will see what's up. Anyway, John, take care. Enjoy the game, and we'll see what you got going, man.
All right. Appreciate it, Stephen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.